In this episode, you're gonna learn few things about several secrets that are not spoken by the many internet tutorials creating developers, especially Flutter developers. These are things that these individuals are not saying because they do not know them or because they do not realize them. They do not have the capacity of grabbing and conceptualizing about them, or they are just dependent from the outcome of their work. So there are totally valid use cases when people have duties that people have families and need to provide food and shelter and so on. So these are totally fine cases when you are forced to forget about these aspects of the frameworks. But in general, I'll tell you several secrets that are rarely said about Flutter and other. So many colleagues around the internet are often too attached to the tools that they are using, and they do not see the big picture of the technology to the real world. It has become their fetish. Other times, so they are purposely ignored, like I said before. So who is responsible for authentication and authorization? Identifying a user against some database or any third-party service platform is a majority, in most cases, a back-end solution, a back-end problem. So the front-end could provide username and passwords. The front-end could provide access, approval. The front-end could collect approval from the user of access to some third-party hardware or software. The client, the user, may request access to operating system managed software keys for authentication. The front end could give access to the client side to the front end to biometrically protected keys with fingerprint, with face recognition, with eye recognition, with smart SIM card readers and flash drive and any type of electrical signature holders. But after that, after the users have given the permission, it goes to the server software to recognize, to find, to authorize access to resources. So the front end may decide what to show to the user and what to hide, but the leading role has the back-end system, what is actually loaded in the front end. What I'm having problem with is the need to include all the stuff in the front end all the time. I am not saying having different code for every single separate page. This is something that was practiced 20 or 25 years ago. Some of you developers probably do not know how things were right in those times. But I have internal philosophical problem when building everything into one. And this is not only my personal problem. Google is trying to invent new solutions with app bundles and with feature modules that are partially loaded in the browsers with PVA. So it is not only my problem. And many front-end frameworks also have code splitting feature implemented into the libraries, like Angular, like Flutter, or should I say Dart, like Webpack. Webpack also packs things in chunks. So it is not only my problem that the client is getting too fat. So this is one of the points, having a fat client. For example, Flutter, the thing that I'm practicing creating applications with most recently, Flutter compiles very fat code on every platform, including JavaScript or WebAssembly for the web. And it is because it draws everything onto the canvas, and it was Flutter recently released 2.0, and it was said that it is not good for search engine optimization, SEO. So Flutter draws the things and less often displays them with actually DOM and CSS, and more of the time with JavaScript. So the JavaScript is getting bigger and bigger. So I have an example applications that you could find. I will probably write another article about it that shows that you don't need to include the Facebook dependency, the Firebase dependency, or whatever package from pubdev to actually authenticate. You need to redirect the user to a login page, and after the user has authenticated, he could go back to the Flutter page, and the backend could grab the authorization. So it is not required for a front end to actually store another dependency within and have a 2 and 3 megabytes of JavaScript instead of megabyte or less. So becoming independent. It seems to me that I am the only developer out there that talks about corporate shit. And corporate shit in terms of dependency. So I have seen other people talk about the corporate culture and stuff, but rarely I see developers talk about the dependency part. When you use Firebase with Flutter, like when you use Firestore, like push notification storage, Firestore hosting, you are bowing to the big corporation. And Flutter is actually created and improved and developed by the big corporation itself. So it seems obvious that you also want to bow to them, to this aspect. Well, Amazon also recently published their version of developer stack, and you could create Flutter applications with the Amplify library. That is very similar framework with probably very similar set of features and services. And there are third-party services for every single thing that you need. Authentication like Okta and auth, and others, push notifications, and more. But you and I probably haven't heard about them too much after we have when after we haven't met the corporate need for that. So this is why the dependencies are growing. CSS versus JavaScript in visualization. This is another aspect that I haven't seen a lot of developers talk about. I know that comparison between these two technologies is somehow meaningless. It is comparing the cow with the chicken. It is only making one of the things, the first thing, CSS is only for making the interface more beautiful, with little to none possibilities to program business logic. The other could have all the business logic, and it also have the API to visualize stuff. So here is strictly my opinion. CSS is faster and smaller and better performing than JavaScript. First point, the size. Well, most of the CSS frameworks, after being compiled, have top size of 100 or 200 kilobytes, and this is after modification. While there are other that are more basic and more plain and more minimal CSS frameworks that are probably even below 10k kilobytes of CSS code. Have you seen the size of the JavaScript frameworks lately? Have you seen the size of Flutter web apps? Megabytes and megabytes of code. And as far as I have seen, the new WebAssembly format is it is better in terms of execution in the execution phase, but it is not helping in the phase of size. If you are targeting high-end customers that have good high-end phones and high-speed connections, it is not a problem. But whenever you think about less powerful users and people that are far away, like in the south of Africa, or even in Wi-Fi connection, that is, if you are far away from the router, you know, the Chrome browser has a feature in the developer tools of restricting caching of resources and throttling the speed connection to 2G internet connection. You could actually try to load your app with a slower internet connection and try to actually make your app perform better. So the performance aspect is CSS is parsed once and it is applied to the DOM only when a matching criteria is found, and JavaScript is parsed and it is interpreted and executed according to its business logic flow. So leading from this size, the bigger the amount of code, the slower it will get. APIs and optimizations. There are APIs that try to optimize to use more optimally the hardware. And while new APIs have appeared, The JavaScript libraries try to check if these features are available, and if the new APIs are actually not available, JavaScript tries to execute them in a software fashion. So this decreases the speed. This is one of the aspects why the many of the big software solutions providers try to minimize the support for older versions of the browsers. For example, WordPress Automatic, the WordPress CMS developers are trying to push for minimize the support for Internet Explorer below, I think, 11. I'm not sure, but this requirement of supporting legacy is increasing the size and the work for the developers. So the bigger the code, the slower it will get, and the developers will have less time to focus on actual performance and using the more modern APIs and features that will bring better speed and so on. So this is it for me for this episode. See you next time.